Thank you. I have to point out a couple things. I am the strongest and best looking Bitcoin entrepreneur in Canada, which makes me by default the strongest and best looking crypto something also, because the crypto people are ugly. We have some fun facts. I'm going to start with Steve Babour to my left, who's a good friend of mine. Steve's fact is very succinct and to the point. He doesn't like fiat, and that's it. Haley, to his left, is a miner who has moved from a career in the business of proof of stake to the business of proof of work. So he's seen the light. That's like many people. I always say there are Bitcoin maximalists and there are pre-Bitcoin maximalists, people who haven't yet understood Bitcoin and haven't gotten there yet. Haley has crossed the line, I hope. To his left is Del Mondor. Del has been riding the same Norco mountain bike that he bought in 1989. It's impressive.
He's also younger than he looks.
That's low time preference.
That is low time preference, yeah. And then Dan at the end. The last time Dan was in Canada was summer camp in Algonquin. I'm not going to guess when that was, but... Okay, I'm going to get started. I'm not going to ask everyone every question here because we have a very good variety of experiences here, but I'm going to ask Steve to start with a couple things. I want to define, like, why are we even talking about Bitcoin mining and oil and gas? First of all, what's going on in oil and gas, very briefly. And then the first question is basically, why are some areas of the world, like Texas, really exploding as compared to Alberta? So start with what are we doing? What's going on?
All right. I guess I want to first off ask you guys, like, how many people here, just raise your hands, like, work or have worked in oil and gas? Good. So quite a bit. It looks like maybe 50% or so. I'll just give you a quick overview of the whole thing. So I'm not going to obviously get into what Bitcoin mining is. I hope most of you have an idea of that. In the oil and gas industry, which of course is one of the biggest foundational industries in Alberta, pretty much underlies our entire economy. The problem in the oil industry is that when you produce oil, you have associated gas, sort of like if you open a can of pop and you shake it up, there's gas in solution and that it foams up, right? So that's just like producing oil. We drill holes, there's gas entrained in the oil. And so one of the biggest problems in the oil and gas industry across the world for a long, long time has been the fact that there's a lot of scenarios where we cannot economically use that gas. So producers in Alberta and across the globe will use the gas to fuel the sites that they're producing oil from. But if it's not like a gas well where you're specifically drilling for gas, oftentimes you won't have a gas pipeline. So you end up wasting it, like flaring, right? That's the famous, flare stack. Everyone's seen it. There's a lot of other technologies to waste the gas in an environmentally friendly fashion, like combustion. Primarily, producers will try to use it as fuel. But the fact is there's a lot of stranded gas. Alberta has over 90,000 suspended or inactive wells. Many of them are oil wells, many of them are gas wells. A lot of these are a huge liability to the government, like to whoever owns them at this moment, but they're at risk of being orphaned and the like. So you've all this energy problems in terms of not being able to market the energy. Mainly the gas is what I'm talking about. So the Bitcoin thing is cool because I'm an oil and gas facilities engineer, and when I heard about Bitcoin in 2016, I immediately was like, okay, Bitcoin mining is energy intensive, it's portable, you can bring it to the site, you can monetize the gas, and sort of in the industry now, I like the term someone coined, they call it a digital pipeline, right? You can plumb that gas into an engine on site, mine Bitcoin, and sell it to anyone in the world. So it's sort of like a digital pipeline in that sense. It's a portable sales point. So it's an actual groundbreaking technology, right? Like any engineer in the room and anyone technology oriented knows what I mean. Like this is something that has not been possible before. So I guess your question is, that's sort of framing like the opportunity. And Alberta happens to be I was in Texas 3 weeks ago for a conference called Empower. Haley to my left was there as well. It was an amazing conference. It was all about oil and gas and Bitcoin. It was the first conference of the like I've seen in 5 years of doing this, doing our business, which what we do, by the way, just a quick shill, is we build Bitcoin mines for oil and gas producers. So it's right up our alley. I went down there and I could not believe, I knew Texas was big into Bitcoin mining. If you guys have been paying attention at all to cryptocurrency mining, you would have known, you probably know that, like there's a ton of investment going in Texas. It's mind blowing. And just the difference in the state of their oil and gas industry, just in optimism even, versus what I see up here talking to producers, is a completely different thing. And the thing is, Texas is actually not nearly as well equipped in terms of the opportunity to mine, to have an industry of Bitcoin mining than we are in Alberta. They're not even close. Alberta has over 20 times the oil and gas reserves as Texas, like 20 times. Now, our economy isn't nearly as big, but the opportunity is way, way bigger. But we are not at all even close to the excitement levels and the investment in Bitcoin mining in the oil field here in Alberta. So we might get into some reasons why. I think we're going to talk about some of that in a bit, but generally speaking, high level, a lot of it has to do with regulatory certainty. Texas is known as a place, it's more of a free market. You can go park your money down there and be reasonably certain that the rules aren't going to flip on you and you're going to lose all your investment. That's sort of not the case here in Alberta, and we might get into that.
Yeah, so let's go to the rest of the panel. Do you guys have any thoughts on why Alberta is not thriving as much as Texas or other areas of the world in Bitcoin mining yet?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to a lot of what Steve said there, and saying that there's so many factors of Alberta that we should be able to outcompete Texas. It's a drier climate here. The air is drier, it's cooler, the sites are less dusty, and another big thing kind of that's plagued the Alberta energy industry for many years is this quest to get our energy resources to tidewater. Whether that's Keystone XL or whether that's the Pacific Coast, that's what we've been trying to do with our energy resources. And Texas has tidewater. They actually, have some of the biggest energy ports in the world. So they have a lot of, we have way, way more incentives to do this opportunity that Steve's talking about. And we should be better at Bitcoin mining. It should run better here, but it's happening there a lot faster. And it really just comes down to the regulatory, the relationship with regulators and just kind of the business environment. Like it's just full steam ahead there. And yet, I don't want to, like, Alberta is a really good place to do business. My company, we focus on mitigating flares with Bitcoin miners. And this is a pretty good place to do business. Like, we've gone from purchasing a data center to having it energized in the oil field in 4 months. And for an energy project, that's quite fast. I think in Texas it could happen in 2 months, right? So it's just about just the relationship and the business environment that I think we're lacking on. And one thing I see at this conference, and I'm seeing a lot more in the past few months, is engagement, by government, by the Alberta government in looking at this opportunity. So just really leaning into it is how I think we can compete with a jurisdiction like Texas or some of the other ones that are kind of put, like Wyoming, that are putting their hand up and saying, we want this business here. The last thing I'll say is to Steve's point that this is, the opportunity is massive. Like the problem in energy production, whether it's oil and gas or even electricity, is just the geographical and sometimes temporal difference of where there's an abundance of energy produced and where it's consumed. And whether that's a pipeline or whether that's a transmission grid, it's often way easier to build out the energy production than the infrastructure that gets it to a city center or where the business or where that energy is going to be used. And there's never been anything like a Bitcoin miner where you can pack a megawatt of demand into a CCAN and then send it to where the energy is produced. And that is just a game changer worldwide that is being embraced. It's being embraced by Texas in a big way, not just off-grid, but on-grid. And the opportunity is massive, and there's never been a technology like that. There's never been anything where you can go and monetize the energy and make use of it exactly where it's produced. And not only that, but you can then pick that up and take it to another spot. It's also very mobile, it's very modular. So the opportunity is huge, and it's great to see Alberta leaning into it. And I just think if we lean into it more and if we craft some good regulation, we can close the gap between us and Texas.
Anyone else?
I'll just add to that because we're talking oil and gas mainly, but it's actually Alberta, for example, among many other jurisdictions in Canada, have invested in renewables like wind and solar. While my expertise in particular is in oil and gas, there's actually that's what a lot of the hype in Texas is about too. It's there's a lot of wind power down there. And of course, with this renewable stuff, it's also very unreliable energy. So you have points in time where the energy needs to be curtailed. So that's a big narrative down in Texas, is that there's a lot of Bitcoin miners flocking to the Texas grid to help what they call load balancing or demand response. And there's plenty of really big projects underway down there doing that as well. So it's while we could get into whether it actually incentivizes renewables or not, it's definitely a good thing for existing renewable projects, because those investors in those projects can have a sales point for their energy when the grid doesn't need it. So it's not just oil and gas, although that certainly for Alberta, I think is what we should focus on, because oil and gas is foundational to the province. You can poke a hole in the ground anywhere, you'll probably find oil and gas in this province.
So I don't know if you guys can tell by looking at the group we have here, but Del is the resident oil baron. So we're going to go to Del for the next question. Oil and gas is a very cyclical industry, and you guys are obviously always looking to add new revenue sources or shore that up wherever you can. How does Bitcoin mining benefit an oil company?
Well, so first and foremost, I've been in this business for a lot of years, born into it, and the company that I own, my dad started 48 years ago. So I've been around the oil business, and the one thing that I cannot stand is a flare, because a flare represents to me wasted potential. Years ago, or even now, the picture of a massive flare represented success. And to me, it represents failure, because it's wasted potential. Now, to me, and when I started looking at the, what could we do? We're in the middle of nowhere. We can't tie this in. We have to do something with it. Otherwise, I've got to look at this every day. And the whole potential of just simply taking, dropping in one of Haley's units and making something happen is, and another revenue stream. Now, the complexion of our industry has changed a whole bunch in the last little bit. I'm sure you're all aware. But when we first started looking at it, it was the bottom of the bottom. And trying to keep people employed, trying to keep operations running, trying to survive was the name of the game at that point. Those days will come again. If you think we're in for $100 oil for the next forever, you're in for a surprise. And this revenue stream that Bitcoin mining allows us is exactly that. It's an ESG story. It allows me to take flares offline and make something of it. I don't care if I'm making lollipops or Bitcoin, I'm making something of it, and Bitcoin pays much better than lollipops. So that's what I'm interested in. And I've got the staff, we've got the people, we've got all the infrastructure out in the field. These people can simply, in their almost part of their day, look after these data centers. There's nothing to it. So I'm not sure if I completely answered the question, but I said what was on my mind.
And I'd love to add to that. I think, something, so if there's any energy traders in the room, like if you were to chart ACO versus Henry Hub, or if you were to chart the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin against WTI, it's a no-brainer what the Canadian index is and what the American is, and it's like, because the Canadian basis is at best flat and often negative and never at a premium. And if the oil and gas people in the room can probably, relate to that, and that's a big challenge in Alberta, and I imagine Saskatchewan, it's getting the fair price for your energy and not trading at a large discount to Henry Hub or WTI. Bitcoin is a release valve. So it's not just an alternative energy stream, it's an alternative market. Where you're almost it's not a monopoly, but we have to send almost all our gas to Cushing, Oklahoma. We're very very interested in what's happening with Keystone XL or any project that helps us access a new market. And Bitcoin mining is an alternative market, and it's one where you don't need to cross a provincial border. And if you don't cross a provincial border, you don't need to deal with a federal regulator. So it's a huge opportunity, and right now, in terms of risk management, when prices are high and when the treasuries are full, this is the perfect time to invest in a diversification, not just an alternative revenue stream or an additional revenue stream, but basically a digital pipeline. To Steve's point, that's exactly what it can be at scale. And it's a huge opportunity for Western Canada, because we've struggled for a decade to get the fair price for our energy.
And what are you seeing in the US, Dan, that has led to more oil companies jumping in as compared to here?
So thanks for the question. Again, Dan Spuller, and I'm from Washington, D.C., but I'm thrilled to be up here in Calgary for the first time. We have mostly a federal approach here for the Blockchain Association. We don't target the states specifically, but we are monitoring the states and what's happening. And you pointed out Texas. There's a lot of other states that are really jumping on this from a strategic standpoint, which includes Florida, believe it or not, many parts of the Deep South and Appalachia, the Carolinas, Kentucky, Tennessee, very good climates for Bitcoin mining. And we're seeing what's emerging is these mining companies they're going to go to where the best power is, the cheapest rates and the most efficiency. Texas right now also has an incredible incentive program, and they've been very favorable, politically speaking, so a lot of companies are naturally going there. But I'm not sure how long that's going to last before other states jump on. Many state legislators now are passing fairly favorable legislation because they're seeing what's happening in Texas and in Florida. You take a look at New York State, so they're doing quite the opposite. And this could be a fantastic advantage, by the way, or an opportunity for Alberta and for other states in the US. They're in the process right now in New York State of passing a moratorium on Bitcoin mining, which is too bad because it's actually gentrifying and improving very troubled parts of upstate New York where a lot of jobs have historically left. These Bitcoin mining companies like Foundry, for example, and Core Scientific, they're coming in and they're retrofitting a lot of these former plants. They're creating jobs. They're creating tax revenue. But unfortunately, there's this mindset of renewables, even though a lot of the mining is actually hydropowered. So I think we're seeing it's a hodgepodge. It's a state-by-state patchwork. It's not federally regulated. But I do want to say it has gotten the attention recently of the federal government through President Biden's executive order that came out about a month ago. One of the key components are calling for a study of crypto mining, we could call it Bitcoin mining, to see what the environmental impacts are, what's the future going to hold, and now more than ever it's become a geopolitical issue because the industry is no longer just competing among states or among nations, friendly nations like ours, but there's the Russia consideration right now. Just this morning and last night, OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, put a ban on Russian mining. And so that's going to affect a lot of international companies that are working on the server farms. So I would keep your eye on those geopolitical issues, and we certainly are, and that's why we like working with the CBC here, our counterpart up here in Canada, to kind of share information and to share ideas and to work collaboratively on these regulatory challenges. But it all boils down to energy.
Awesome. This next one, I feel like we're going to have a lot of opinions. I'm going to ask Dan to start with this one again. Bitcoin has often been scrutinized for its energy use. The latest one I've seen was Bitcoin uses as much power as Denmark. And I don't think anyone's really addressing what a colossal waste of power Denmark is. But is that well-deserved, Dan?
Yes, it's not well-deserved because, not the Denmark part, but just the part of wasted energy and clean energy. So about a year ago, give or take, China put a full-fledged ban on Bitcoin mining. And as a result of that, most of the miners left the country and they chose more favorable jurisdictions. So the biggest beneficiaries have been Kazakhstan, Canada, and the United States. Every morning, I think I wake up and I look at the Bitcoin, Cambridge has a Bitcoin electricity consumption index. It's really exciting. But you should take a look at it because you can see the hash rate and you can see the actual usage of these countries, and it was almost a drop from China about a year ago, like a full drop. And again, the countries that benefited are actually using a lot of clean energy. And so that's where I think the conversation needs to be had. When it left China, it ceased to be as much coal, let's say, and it moved towards other areas and other resources. But I think the countries that are benefiting from Bitcoin mining now are much more favorable towards energy consumption.
And for me, I would just say that, you know, I'm on the oil and gas side. I'm looking at these flares, and that's all there's a whole bunch of other potential energy sources. But for me, it's just ridiculous that we've still got these things in the air and not being used to mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think an issue with that narrative of, you know, Bitcoin uses as much energy as X country, whether it's Peru or Norway or Denmark, is the assumption that if Bitcoin mining wasn't using it, that it would be going to some wonderful use. And it's also just completely ignoring the opportunity that Steve was talking about, which is that Bitcoin fundamentally changes the ability for you to bring the demand for energy to where the supply is. So, for example, you know, we're a flare gas miner. We're basically sitting on energy that wasn't being used, and you know, for the environmental lens, an existing carbon footprint. So it's not like if we turn off our Bitcoin mine that there's, you know, more energy, or that grandma's utility bill is going to drop. We're securing the network on what was wasted energy. So that's, you know, like, I won't say at all that all the energy usage of Bitcoin is flare gas or is wasted energy, but there's a good percentage of it that is. And just as another, this is kind of more of a hobby thing or an anecdote, but I personally, like, all the hot water in my house comes from a Bitcoin miner. And if I didn't have that Bitcoin miner heating my hot water, I would have natural gas heating the hot water. So it's a fun little hobby project where I'm double spending my energy bill, but Canada spends billions on space heating a year. So if there's some innovative projects where we use that heat in a greenhouse, if we use that heat to power this building or to heat this building, you're making use of, you're already doing what you're doing before, you're heating something, but you're also mining Bitcoin. So that doesn't work with the argument that it uses as much energy as X country, because you're finding creative solutions that basically you do two things at once, whether it's flare gas or whether it's space heating. So it's a very nuanced topic, a very nuanced argument.
Yeah, I'll add to that, like what you said about it's not necessarily additive, right? If Bitcoin, like, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if it's Denmark level energy, that's not additive to the global energy use, especially in oil field. In oil field, it's almost all just displacing energy that's wasted. All the hydro that's being used, all the renewable, like solar and wind, that's displacing energy that's being wasted. So it's not an additive thing. So that was a really good point there. The thing I want to add is that we got to remember, like, value is subjective, right? If you say that energy in Bitcoin mining is a waste, that's a waste to you, right? It's not a waste to me or the person that's using the Bitcoin network. So the people that usually say that Bitcoin mining is a waste of energy, they're not using Bitcoin. So it's like me saying cauliflower is a waste of energy because I don't like cauliflower, right? Like, I don't go around saying that because I'm not naive enough to think that none of you guys like cauliflower. Who here likes cauliflower? Like, raise your hand. You know, like, you know, I'm not going to go tell you don't serve cauliflower because it's a waste and it's not healthy and you're doing nothing but, you know, passing worthless stuff through your system. Like, but you know what I'm saying? So like the energy waste thing is really a hypocritical thing to say, because no one who uses Bitcoin thinks that it's a waste of energy. Every joule that goes through a machine is actually paid for. provably, because every Bitcoin that's mined has value. And you could argue that, okay, if you lose your coins, well, it ended up being a waste of energy. But the fact is that people pay Bitcoin miners for a reason, because we're paying for a service being provided to us. And I subjectively have my reasons on why I value Bitcoin. Everyone else has their own reasons. So that alone is enough to quash that argument, in my opinion. And hopefully you guys agree with that.
I like cauliflower, but I'm kind of mad about the way they've been putting sauce on it and selling it for like $20. I think if somebody buys power and uses it as intended, there's no way it can be wasted. Simple way to look at it, I think. Square and ARK Invest put out a white paper, pretty well done, I thought, that suggested that Bitcoin mining would actually incentivize the creation of renewable energy. Let's start with Haley on this one. What do you think?
I agree with this, and I come out in favor of this. And again, to kind of hammer home the point that this is because Bitcoin can go and can bring the demand to where the supply is, and you can plaster 100 acres with wind turbines or with solar panels way faster than you can build the multi-billion-dollar transmission line to take it away. So that's where a Bitcoin can come in, and you can start getting return on those assets and start making a more productive project while you wait perhaps years or half a decade for the transmission line to be built out. And this is a big example, and it's happening in Texas in a big way. And I guess I would even extend more than it just incentivizes renewables. It can balance out your energy grid. It's there's nothing like Bitcoin in terms of smart demand response, where you can have such a dense energy source or demand ramp down within seconds. There's no whether there's all of these grids all over North America, all over the world are looking at demand response and getting people to do their laundry at certain times, or dialing down their air conditioner without their permission and stuff. And it's very interesting, it's very innovative, but none of these solutions can hold a candle to Bitcoin. So and what we're seeing in Texas, as opposed to New York, is the Bitcoin miners are starting to participate in the energy markets, in the power markets, in the ancillary service markets. They're becoming a huge participant, and so they're helping balance out the grid, and that's just beneficial to society as a whole. So it's more than just the renewables, it's having a more efficient, more robust grid where you're not to get too into the weeds, but if you were to study power markets in university, they'd probably still teach you that the demand curve for electricity is a vertical line. That it's just there's no price elasticity. That load will pay whatever the price is for energy to keep the lights on. And that's with Bitcoin mining, it actually becomes a much more traditional supply-demand curve, like kind of in the X shape for an economist, because all of a sudden Bitcoin miners will ramp down. The price cap in Alberta for power is $1,000 a megawatt hour. So if you're a Bitcoin miner and you're participating in the grid, the price of Bitcoin would need to be $150,000 at current market metrics for it to make sense for you to run your facility. So there's an economic incentive for you to ramp down. In Texas, the price cap is $5,000. So Bitcoin would need to be $1 million per Bitcoin for it to make sense to mine if you're at your price cap. So you're seeing Bitcoin miners in a bigger and bigger way participate in traditional energy markets, and it's actually fixing a lot of the problems that building out too many renewables and having too much renewable penetration in the grid created. So I'm really in big agreement that not only does it incentivize renewables, but it makes for a better, robust grid. The caveat is that Bitcoin mining needs to participate in demand response. So a lot of Bitcoin miners will go out, they'll get a PPA, 5 cents a kilowatt hour or something, and that's their cost of energy, and they'll just run 24/7, and they're not even looking at the hourly price. And as they get more sophisticated, as they see the opportunity, then they're not gonna get booted out of Texas like there's a moratorium in New York, because they're directly participating and they're part of the solution. And then just back to the government, like the talking about why it's working in Texas, it's because government and industry sees this. They see it as a solution. They don't just see it as a bunch of GDP coming. They actually see it as a way to solve energy problems. And that's why I founded my company. I believe that's why Steve founded his company. So seeing that opportunity, it changes the game.
Grid, like whether you're an oil and gas upstream like energy guy or you're on the grid like Fortis Alberta, Inmax, and others, you generally have to oversize, like it's just an engineering requirement, you have to oversize your generation capacity to meet the peak demand, right? Else you'll have blackouts or brownouts, right? So especially with wind and solar, you have to oversize because it's not a steady, like coal or nuclear, right, is a more steady base load. Solar and wind are more variable and oftentimes unpredictable, weather-based, that kind of thing. So you have no choice but to oversize your generation. So Bitcoin mining is great because you can, especially if these generating companies, like whether they're like public entities in Canada or private entities in places like Texas, they can partner or become their own, like invest in their own mine on site upstream of everything else downstream, and which is actually really efficient because if you're mining Bitcoin right where you generate the power, you don't have transmission losses throughout the grid. So you actually save a ton of energy that way, and you can actually be a lot more profitable that way. Problem is right now, Bitcoin is still so edgy that a lot of utilities and like Fortis Alberta, as far as I know, while they might sort of, I'm hearing things that they're sort of starting to embrace it through there's a company I talked to here yesterday who's doing Fortis is coming in to inspect their facility, but Fortis themselves aren't necessarily investing in it. I see that changing in the future. We've seen that change already in the oil and gas industry. When I started my company in 2017, I couldn't get anyone to buy anything, so I had to bring it to their site and do a deal with them. But now most of our sales are direct to the oil company. They mine their own Bitcoin, and we just help them deal with managing it. So, I mean, for grids in general, I mean, Alberta, I heard, I'm not an expert on the Alberta's energy systems, like grid systems, but I've heard that we have a bit of a surplus because we had invested in a lot of infrastructure prior to there being, the economy went to the dumps, right? So we were forecasting demand in this province. We overbuilt some stuff. We did a lot of coal to natural gas conversion, I believe. We did a lot of renewable projects. So we currently have a bit of an oversupply. And I called Nmax because I mine Bitcoin at home. We build these home mining boxes. And I was a little pissed off because my transmission fees went through the roof. I locked in at a really great per kilowatt hour, but my transmission fees went through the roof. I called Nmax. And they said to me, well, we basically increased our transmission prices because we built all this infrastructure and the current demand isn't what we forecasted. So they actually had to jack up rates to all their consumers to offset that cost. So, I mean, these companies, I don't know if they're seriously, any of you guys are involved with any of these utility outfits. I think that's a serious opportunity there, whether they invest in it themselves or they just openly talk about being receptive to Bitcoin mining. Quebec is a famous example in Canada. Quebec is abundant hydro, right? I'm a Newfie, so they're ripping off Newfoundland. They have some awesome hydro deals, and they make a lot of money in hydro. They have a lot of hydro. They put a moratorium on Bitcoin mining back in 2018, and they absolutely destroyed the opportunity in the province because all these massive firms, a lot of external capital from the country, like Bitmain is a big mining company. There's others that were flooding into Quebec due to their cheap power. They ruined it. They ruined it all with poor regulation. And I think Alberta really needs to consciously, everyone here and everyone influencing Alberta politicians and regulators should really think this through because we have an amazing opportunity, not just in oil and gas, but across the whole energy grid in this province.
Yeah, I just want to say that's right on the money. I think part of the problem is education. So probably 90% of what we do still is education with policymakers. Now it's gotten a lot better over the last several years, but unfortunately, many folks still fundamentally misunderstand the concept of Bitcoin mining, and it's an easy out to just compare it to how they illicit finance, for example. If somebody doesn't understand Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, they'll immediately fall back on that it's only used for money laundering, which of course has been debunked. But mining is similar now, where it's now easy to say, oh, it just consumes energy, it's not good for the environment, it's a cop-out. And so I think the people, especially the officials, the elected officials, and even the appointed ones from the regulatory standpoint, that get it, that grasp it, can really benefit their respective jurisdiction. So you've seen champions in different parts of the world. You look at El Salvador, but even in Florida, the mayor down there has just become a global champion for it, and as a result, there's a very large mass migration of Bitcoin companies to Miami. Very similar with the governor of Texas, and so Alberta has this fantastic opportunity, for Canada. And I think it's already happening from what it sounds like.
Yeah, so I'm going to expand on this question a little bit. I kind of wish we had a renewable energy person on the panel, but I thought it was really interesting. The oil industry is this very fundamental industry to everything that we do, and companies like Dell's literally pull energy out of the ground that fuels our entire lives. And you guys saw Dell have an almost emotional response to he hates wasting energy. He hates the flare. Do you guys think, and I'm gonna go to Dell and Dan for this question, do you guys think that do the renewable energy people feel the same way about wasting energy? And do they care? And are they actually doing this?
I'm certainly not an energy expert, but I would imagine that nobody wants to waste energy. And if they can figure out a way to harness it and capture it and then turn it into a different revenue source, then they're going to do that. What's happening with Crusoe Energy, a company out of the United States, partnering with Exxon, which just made a big announcement, about a week or so ago. That would have been unheard of a few years ago. A major big oil company like that. But this is what's happening. And I think that's going to grasp a lot more attention now to some of these other utilities and players in different parts of the world.
Well, I've got to think that anybody in the renewable space, they're energy people. These are my fellow energy people, and I can't imagine that they would be happy about any kind of waste, any kind of wasted potential. So I think they're probably in the same boat. But this is what I'm looking at. This is what Alberta looks at when you're driving down the highway or in Saskatchewan. It's right there. It's in front of us. I see the renewables. I see the windmills, the solar farms. I don't entirely get exactly what Haley's talking about with the ups and downs. I kind of get it, but to me, it's right in our face. I got to assume that they're on board as well, but not waste any energy. But this is what is on my mind is the flares.
Great. Let's go for the last question. We'll start with Haley on this one. So we've gotten, as an industry, a lot of support from the provincial government lately. We've gotten some federal candidates talking about Bitcoin favorably, and it looks like the mindset of government is shifting. But what do you think, is the government doing a good job of supporting Bitcoin mining in Alberta, and what should they be doing differently?
Yeah, so I would say I'm very encouraged about what I seen here at this conference, and I would say to Dan's point that where we need to be at right now is we need to focus on education. So organizations like yours, organizations like the Canadian Blockchain Consortium that put on this conference, they're doing huge heavy lifting in terms of education. There was a bulletin posted by the Alberta Energy Regulator yesterday. I have similar feelings about it from what the Alberta Utilities Commission posted last September. And what I think my view is that their bulletins or their policies that are being posted by people in the government who don't fully understand what's going on in this province, how it can be a force for good. So I would say that continuing the education and the engagement, and I would encourage anyone who has kind of connections to these organizations. What I would love to see is someone who's out there in the oil field, mitigating flares and doing the opportunity that we talked about, is a joint statement from the AER and the AUC after a good consultation with the industry about what's going on, so it creates clarity. What I feel from the AUC and the AER, they're trying to come out and they're trying to create clarity but because they don't fully understand the technologies and the applications, it's actually almost doing the opposite. It's creating uncertainty. Like I had a business, an energy partner call us yesterday, worried about this bulletin, and kind of saying, well, should we just not mine Bitcoin and flare instead? And I don't think that'll be the case, but that's just kind of the uncertainty that this bulletin caused. And I would encourage government to instead, AUC and the AER should sit down. They're both obviously putting resources into understanding what this is. So engage with this organization, the CBC, and get educated, because like I would, and Steve is the same. We'd love to engage with government and get some policy that makes sense and that brings more money here, more investment, more companies like ours. And I think right now it's too piecemeal what we're seeing, and it's not reflective, or it's not appropriate given what's actually happening out in the field.
I got strong opinions on that topic, but I won't get too deep into the weeds. But I generally think that the Alberta as a whole, more specifically the Alberta Energy Regulator and Alberta Energy, who's responsible for royalty regime, and I think the Alberta environment is responsible for how carbon tax is administered in the province. As a whole, they're not doing a very good job at all at creating regulatory certainty. Because as a business, right, all you guys know this, like if you don't know what the rules are, it's really hard to do business. Like if you don't, even if the rules are bad, at least if you know what the rules are and you know they're not going to change after you invest money, it's a lot easier to figure out, like, are we going to invest in this province? And right now, they're not being very good at making it clear. Like, it's taken 5 years for the Alberta Energy Regulator, 5 years of my customers in this province mining Bitcoin on oil wells, to put out some clarity of that bulletin that just came out. That bulletin was about Bitcoin miners and therefore whether it's a third-party miner like some of our builds or our customers that work with oil companies, or if it's an oil company themselves, the gas that's used needs a royalty paid on it. And that's absolutely legit. It should. It's being sold. There should be a royalty. The mineral owner should make money. But the problem is that and this is just one specific problem out of many, a vent or a flare, which is wasting gas and polluting the environment, doesn't have a royalty on it. So as soon as our customer converts their vent gas, which is 25 times worse for the environment than flaring, it's very, very bad in terms of carbon metrics. As soon as they convert that vent to a Bitcoin mine, they all of a sudden get penalized with a royalty they have to pay. And that's just not right. Like, there has to normalize whether the royalty, either put the royalty in the waste of the fuel as well to the mineral owner, or take away the royalty and make it the same, because Bitcoin mining is helping oil and gas producers become compliant and emissions and reduce emissions. So these rules are actually incentivizing waste. So that's the royalty rules. And I'll just quickly touch on the carbon rules. Carbon tax is exempt from upstream oil and gas producers currently for venting and flaring. They have a different regime in which they get penalized, but the actual specific carbon tax is exempt presently. There's different tier programs, and the whole thing is really complicated, which is actually a part of the problem on regulatory certainty. But again, as soon as they convert that flare to a stationary power generation, that power generation now has a carbon tax, and it's not even regulated by the same guys that normally regulate oil and gas production, like the AER. It's regulated by a whole different group. So it's like there's a whole hodgepodge of rules. None of my customers, I'm talking about some of the biggest oil companies in Canada, clearly understand the rules on Bitcoin mining because it's so obscure. And I've been professionally working in this space for 5 years. I still don't understand the rules in Alberta. So that is what regulators need to fix.
And no one has confidence they're not going to change next month, myself included.
Exactly.
So before we go to questions, I'm going to add my own opinion to that. I think it's very clear from the lack of understanding, the lack of clarity, that the government is not going to fix this. Really, they don't need to fix anything. They just need to get out of the way and let the industry build itself. And I think that we probably say that for almost every industry, but this is a clear case where all we need is to remove the bullshit rules, and we'll be good.
And I just, on that note, I have a policy proposition for Alberta, and I'm more than happy to field questions on it. But right now, there's a bill that is being drafted or close to approved. It's Bill 86. This is a pretty big deal. This for the first time, it would allow producers of a power plant to self-supply. And the big question kind of right now is, like, from what I've seen about Bill 86, is it's going to go through. The question is, how many, so let's just say you put a Bitcoin miner right next to a natural gas power plant. So the question is, so it's great because there's no transmission costs, but the legislators right now are kind of debating, okay, but this activity, there needs to be some money flowing to the grid, some money flowing to the utilities commissions. They're trying to figure out what that fee is. And to Dave's point about getting out of the way, I would say that, while that legislation is still malleable, if there was a clause in there that said that whatever this fee is, that there's a 50% or 75% exemption for a co-located data center, so that doesn't need to be Bitcoin mining, it can be any kind of data center that will participate in demand response. That would be a huge, huge policy. It would drive billions of dollars. People would come here. It would give us a more robust grid. And it's very easy to do because the legislation is being passed. No matter what, Bill 86 will create a lot of data centers that are going to be co-located with power plants, but to basically not create an economic disincentive to have this happen, but say, actually, we see that this will make a more robust grid, so we don't need to levy these fees. I would really encourage anyone involved with Bill 86 to consider that, because I can guarantee it would drive billions of dollars of business.
I just want to add quickly, you guys enjoy your power bills lately? How are they? Like, how are you on your variable rate? Are you enjoying that? I mean, inflation systemically is causing this, of course, but if Bitcoin miners come in and help these generating companies and these utilities generate more revenue, because it's actually, these guys don't even have to invest anything. There's so much money in the space. They'll put all the money into the infrastructure. So if they just welcome them, your power bills will go down inevitably, because these guys will start making more money. And they won't have to offset those costs to us. So it's in everyone's best interest to get this going.
One more note on that, just as like a visceral example, is like a natural gas plant. Like I used to trade electricity, and I worked at TransAlta. It's very common for them to run unprofitably during the off-peak, during night, because they don't want to actually ramp down their whole facility and then have to ramp on again. And then, so what they have to do is they have to bake in that loss into the marginal cost that they need on the on-peak, so that ups everyone's power bill. So a co-located data center that is willing to be interruptible, what they can do is they can keep those power plants on at night profitably in the off-peak. And the off-peak, not just night and day, but seasonally, because we have pretty seasonal demand, and that will lower everyone's electricity bill, because if a power plant has a guaranteed anchor tenant that will pay them their marginal cost through the off-peak, then they don't need to basically demand a premium in the on-peak for running unprofitably. So that's just it's a. And so, like Steve said, these companies will come in and they'll pay everything, and you'll get this direct investment in Alberta. It'll give us a more robust grid, and everyone's power bills will go down. It's an absolute win.
All right, let's go to some questions.
Hi there. Thanks very much for just an awesome panel. Nodding my head through a number of observations in terms of robust grid, and then also picking up on some discussion on why we're not like Texas. It's great to see Dell's observations as someone in the industry, as a co-founder of a failed startup that tried to use stranded gas as part of the distributed power network, which would be, I think, something that, again, would stabilize grid. I wonder if you can comment on my observation as to why that failed, and that had to do, in my opinion, with conversations with CEOs of largely public companies, unable to understand a portfolio approach to their assets, namely uneconomic, stranded gas that's flared. They would rather keep it even if there is no prospect of being economic in any time in the future, because it just goes into their reserves, they can't fathom the cost of selling it at less than AECO, because they'd rather get nothing for their asset than sell it for what they feel that they should get at a minimum. Curious on your thoughts.
My first thought was you were talking to the wrong CEOs. That's not the kind of, that's nobody I know. Because people I know now, even with this new complexion of our industry being, certainly a lot better than it was, maybe even during your time with the startup, I can't imagine. There must have been some other mitigating circumstances. Maybe there wasn't, but there's always the challenge of, well, maybe we'll get it tied in. Maybe we'll eliminate it. They worry about whether you're going to be around tomorrow. They worry about, and we were just talking about government regulations, because that gets in the way a lot of the time when you're trying to convert flare to power and then to whatever. And but I would just say it's not easy, and I found that out myself, getting from flare to power to Bitcoin. It's not easy. During good times, the oil and gas people are worried about oil and gas and drilling for it and producing it. But I don't know those people that you're talking about.
They are people, they are CEOs of public companies that are among the largest public companies in Alberta, in Canada. So I'll have a chat afterwards.
Yeah, and I would have a different opinion. I mean, I own my company 100%. I've got an intimate, I've got an intimate relationship with my assets. Truly, I've been running around these things since I was 5 years old. So, I mean, I've got probably a different perspective than a CEO of a major corporation like that.
A quick perspective I have on that is like when I was working for Husky Energy in Lloydminster, we had a lot of initiatives actually to do that kind of thing, like internally to do power generation off for waste gas, tie into the SAS power. The problem was at a lot of those facilities, not disregarding the fact that, okay, we're never really sure how long the gas is going to be available on those sites, because a lot of them are upstream wells. So that's one risk. But the other problem at that time was SAS Power, their permitting process, the time it took, and you would know this well, was, and I don't know about the Alberta side, but I worked on the SAS side of the border, and it was disgusting, and the contracts you'd have to sign and be tied into made it very difficult. And my work on those projects was partly why it clicked for me as soon as I learned about Bitcoin. It was just clear as day, right?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that question, what I've seen is that often the decision makers, especially at the board level, they feel they have more to lose personally by sticking their neck out on something like Bitcoin mining than the benefit, which sometimes will be marginal in a really big public company, that they'll see. So a lot of it is about personal brand, and I've seen that a lot where it dies at the board level, and it's because no one wants to stick their neck out. And that would be, I've experienced similar things to you here, so that's what I would say. And you're right, you got to talk to someone like Del, who is the president and the decision maker, and instead of a board, or it's harder to do with the big public companies because they're thinking, what are my shareholders going to think? And yeah,
I can't get fired, and so I'm free to make the right decision.
Who's next?
Yeah. Hello? Thanks. John Forchuk here with Sky Measurement. Del, good to see you again. Okay. Thank you for taking a leadership position on this for our industry. My question, Del, is we talked a lot about Alberta. What about in Saskatchewan? Is it more favorable, and is there Bitcoin mining activity in Saskatchewan as well?
There is a difference with. We're fine. I think that the environment in Alberta is much better than it is in Saskatchewan. And I am born and raised in Saskatchewan. I'm a Calgarian now, but and Steve had brought it up. Our monopoly power company in Saskatchewan really provided some major roadblocks to flare to power. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I think that's carried on into the Bitcoin. The gas makeup is different in Saskatchewan than it is in Alberta. I think there's a lot more sour, liquids-rich gas in Saskatchewan than in some areas of Alberta. So I think ease of product and maybe, I dare say, easier regulations in Alberta.
My perspective as a guy working on the border in Lloyd, and I worked with my counterparts on the Alberta side, I was on the SAS side. When we were doing facility projects, SAS was actually in a lot of ways easy to deal with. On the Bitcoin mining, for example, like in Saskatchewan, it might have changed recently, but back when I was in production in 2016 and from 2011 to 2016, Saskatchewan, you could vent 900 cubic meters a day per upstream facility. Alberta was a lot less. It was only 500. And of course, they're all talking right now about dropping that even further. So there's probably, if those rules, I do believe they're still in place now. They haven't changed them yet. But that, in a sense, Saskatchewan has more opportunity. We have probably an equal mix of customers across both sides of the border. But at least for regulatory uncertainty, it sort of exists in both jurisdictions. Like we talk mostly about Alberta. Saskatchewan has basically similar regulatory frameworks. They often actually mimic Alberta's frameworks. They have like this OGMR body that deals with emissions penalties and carbon. And it's a lot of the same. Like a lot of the stuff we talked about, misincentives or misaligned incentives is happening in Saskatchewan as well. So we're actively, we've talked to both regulators on both sides, and we've been trying to impress upon them the opportunity they could have, because you know, even if you let this industry thrive, you're actually going to make more oil, because there's a lot of oil wells, like a lot of big public companies, especially the big companies, won't produce in a, well, they'll stick to the rules, right? They're not going to be non-compliant, which means if they're venting too much gas and they're above what they're allowed to vent, they'll throttle their well production, and therefore they're throttling the royalties to the province, which is infrastructure, right? That goes into our infrastructure, our hospitals, our roads. So the rules are actually throttling a lot of productivity on both sides of the border.
I think we got time for one more question.
Hi. This is sort of capacity question. If you have natural gas wells that are exploration wells and they've watered out, or they're high sulfur content or something like that, is there an upper limit to the flow rates on, like you were talking associated gas with your company for mining Bitcoin? So I'm assuming that's a sort of smaller volume, and I could be mistaken. Is there like an upper limit that you guys have done in terms of flow rates for natural gas? And have you dealt with anything like high water content or something that's nefarious to an oil gas company, but like he was talking stranded gas?
I can speak a bit to that. There's not really an upper limit. If you got good quality gas, that's not, you know, we don't deal with sour gas, so you're just going to chew your engine up. It's a lot more cost. So in my company, when a producer has sour gas, we say, hey, like, do something else. It's probably not the best opportunity on your books. So we don't really get into that just because of how complicated it is to run an engine on that. Haley knows that. Haley has a site, I believe, that's semi-sour. So assuming the quality is where it needs to be, where you're no issues running an engine, which I would say most natural gas in both provinces, Sask and Alberta, are that way. It just depends on where you're at. But there's not really an upper limit. It scales linearly. So like we build these modular engine designs, so you could just like add more engines, add more Bitcoin mines, all the way up the stack to the volume you need to get. And then if that volume will inevitably decline, and you can start pulling engines off and put them on new sites. So it's not really an upper limit, but there is challenge. Gas wells are easier because you can just cap the rates at wherever you want them to be, anywhere under their max, right? Obviously dealing with water and all that, that's standard practice in any production. So it's a part of your cost. We have one of my first Texas client actually was a stranded gas well, and that's a big part of the market we go after is these. What I say is like, you know, because a lot of people don't like the fact that we help stranded gas come online because they say, well, that's carbon. But there's a lot of carbon sunk in the capital of drilling those wells. So we help these people recover that capital and pay off their investment. Because the one thing we didn't talk about at all is the absolute systemic liability in this province of potential orphan wells, which there's over 90,000. I believe there's actually well over that in inactive wells. And basically the price of oil and gas has to go up to activate those wells. And they're all at risk of being orphaned to the government and for us, the taxpayer, to pay the bill. So if we can help stranded gas producers monetize that, recover their capital, and then reclaim the well properly, put the money into abandonment, it's a good thing.
Is when you said engine,
Yeah, for the off-grid opportunity, I would say, like, we often look for what I'll call like a Goldilocks project. So if there's really high quality gas in really high volumes, it's probably tied in. The economic and environmental incentives to tie that in are, especially at these prices, are incredibly strong. So if you're looking at stranded gas or flare gas, there's usually a reason why they're flaring it or why it's stranded. It might be the quality or it might be the geography. So, but also to do a Bitcoin mining project, you don't want to be so small that it barely makes sense to tend to it and to put the capital investment there. So it needs to be big enough to make that worth it. But then if the energy supply is very high grade or very high volume, then the energy company already knows what to do with it. So there's kind of like a Goldilocks zone, I would say, of where they are flaring it, but it is good enough gas in a high enough volume to warrant an off-grid Bitcoin mining project. So we're always in search for that kind of Goldilocks zone, like not too small, not too big, because it exists, but there's especially as you go smaller, more remote, more sour, more water content, the capital required to make that project work, they go up. So there's definitely challenges. Like it's an amazing opportunity, but it's often not easy.
when you said engine, you were referring to like a turbine coupled
Sorry, we
with
can't hear you.
When you said engine, you turbine coupled with a genset.
Yeah, natural gas engine paired with a generator.
But they're just pre-existing, like somewhere else in the industry, off-the-shelf turbines. They're not like engineered for this particular purpose that you're doing.
Normal natural gas gensets are usually suitable. So like reciprocating engines, while we build, or Haley's got like a turbine, don't you? So yeah, turbines, recip engines, as the prime mover, right? Converting the natural gas to turn that alternator. Yeah.
Okay.
Gensets.
Thank you.
All right, looks like we are done. Please thank Dave Bradley, Stephen Babour, Haley Thomson, Dell Mondor, and Dan Spuller.